Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, adnastana. It's wonderful to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio, and this is another one of those segments that I'm really looking forward to, because just to give you some background on what you're about to see today, in the March 8th segment of Points of Light Radio, I dealt with the feedback. I answered some of the questions and so on in the correspondence that you've been sending me in the feedback section of my YouTube channel. But in this particular segment of Points of Light Radio, I will be talking directly and interviewing a person who has been leaving a lot of feedback on my YouTube channel, right? And that gentleman goes by the YouTube handle of Catholic Perennialist. First of all, what does the name mean? Well, specifically, perennialism is the view that there is a shared core of truth in all major religions. This is sometimes called perennial philosophy. And the core of it is grounded in and justified by shared religious experiences, usually of the mystical variety. And like I said, this gentleman has left a lot of feedback on my YouTube channel. He's uncomfortable appearing on camera, so he will not actually appear on camera. But he's here today. He seems very learned from my correspondence with him, so I'm really looking forward to this, actually. But he's here today to discuss the origin of fraternalism and the content of fraternal mysteries, possibly among other things. Like I said, he's camera shy, so I'm going to let him stay off camera. This is going to be interesting, and we will be doing another segment at a later date, because this is part of two different interviews that I'll be doing with them. So this is part one that we're doing today. I'm going to try to catch up with them possibly tomorrow or the next day, and we'll do another segment, but a series of interviews, shall we say, like you saw before. But I'm really looking forward to this. So, are you still thirsty for knowledge? Are you still searching for the light? Well, just trim your lamp and follow me, because this is going to get interesting for all of us. Catholic Perennialist, welcome to Points of Light Radio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, so you are the one YouTube subscriber, one of my YouTube subscribers who leaves regular and interesting feedback. So first of all, why don't you tell my listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself, or as much as you can?
Sure. I'm a retired school teacher. I am a Freemason. I am a Roman Catholic, and I study a lot of esoteric subjects, a lot of ancient history. I have a degree in Latin, so I've read a lot of Latin in the original. I've translated the entire book of Matthew out of Latin into English. So my studies tend to take me into the medieval era, the ancient civilizations, linguistics, and the esoteric. And I find that these converge easily on the Crusades. Really, that's where everything kind of creates a watershed.
Okay, so one of the things you want to talk about here tonight was the origins and evolution of fraternalisms, its rituals, and its degrees. So, why don't you start? You have some things prepared there, so why don't you tell us about the evolution, shall we say, the origins and evolutions of fraternalism?
Sure, and I make a distinction between the mysteries and fraternalism, because originally these were two separate things. because Freemasonry, as many of its authors will admit, is founded upon the Eleusinian mysteries and the Mithraic mysteries.
Okay.
The Eleusinian mysteries were Greek mysteries that drew a lot from the Egyptian mythos, but they were open to both male and female. So technically, it was not a fraternity, but it was a mystery school.
Yep.
So the origin of fraternalism really isn't with the Eleusinian mysteries, but the mystery system, you could say, is certainly grounded in the Eleusinian mysteries of the Greeks. Where we get into the all-male fraternal structure is with Mithraism, because Mithraism was not open to females. Mithraism was exclusively for males and usually for soldiers. It was a soldiers' martial cult, so to speak. So I have some points, and the first major heading I have written down is the origins of fraternalism, and ultimately its origins are religious. And Freemasonry would say that it's not a religion nor a replacement for religion, but it is religious. You have to believe in God. And so there is that element that kind of bleeds through even to the present, that Freemasonry, although not a religion, is inherently religious. The mystery cults of the Greeks, for instance, were built on the myth of Demeter, who we also call in Latin Ceres, and it was her daughter Proserpina that was carried down into Hades and had to be rescued. But because she had eaten some pomegranate seeds in Hades, several months out of the year, she had to be abducted back into Hades. And this is when all the plant matter, all the greenery of the earth died. And so this was basically an explanation, a mythological explanation for the seasons. And we have this even in the Catholic Church. We have the liturgical calendar, and in the liturgical calendar we celebrate the birth of Christ, and then the death of Christ, and then the resurrection of Christ. Much as we see the death of the greenery, the death of the crops, the death of the leaves on the trees, they fall and they die, and then we see the rebirth around the time of Christ's resurrection in the spring.
Yeah, certainly. So, the Bible says that if something is not quickened, it isn't quickened unless it dies.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, I see what you're getting at.
Yes, and so you see this theme even in Christianity, and Christianity began as a mystery school. Much of what we know as Christian theology was not open to the commoner. You had to be a catechumen for several years before you could learn even basic Christian theology or see a Eucharist service. And so this system of the revolution of the seasons was the theme of the Eleusinian mysteries. But as A.E. Waite says in his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the mythos was not the core, the central dogma of the Eleusinian mysteries. But as you progressed into those mysteries, and there were lower and higher mysteries, just as in Masonry, there's the Blue Lodge, the Scottish Rite, the York Rite. You can progress through these mysteries. The system would progress to the point that you understood that the God that you worship is one. And this was radical to polytheists because they worship many gods. But the Eleusinian mysteries, if you advance far enough, you'd get to the point where you understood that God is not multiplicity, God is singularity, and that the individual gods are simply manifestations of some aspect of the greater God. And so this becomes the central tenet of the mystery schools, that God is one. There is a unity at the center of the Godhead. So that becomes the secret that nobody will talk about. Because as Socrates expressed much the same sentiment, he was called an atheist and finally threatened with either exile or death, and he chose death. And so this knowledge that God was one became buried within these mysteries because it was potentially lethal to express them openly. So that's where the that's where the secrecy comes from. When we talk about swearing oaths of secrecy in the fraternal organizations, that originates with this knowledge that was radical for its time, that God is one.
Okay. Interesting.
The Eleusinian mysteries. The Eleusinian mysteries were open to women, so that it wasn't technically a fraternity at that point, but it was a mystery school. The Persians, who were just across the Bosphorus, the Straits, from the Greeks, the Persians inhabited that empire just to the east of the Roman Empire. They contributed to the mystery schools in the form of Mithraism. And what Mithras was essentially a Christ figure who was a anthropomorphized manifestation of Ahura Mazda, a wisdom figure. And so he was associated with the sun, much like Apollo, and he was a Christ figure for the Mithraists. And within the Mithraic system, there were 7 degrees, much like in Freemasonry. If you combine the Blue Lodge with the Royal Arch, it's 7 degrees total. 7 being a divine number for reasons that we'll get into later. But the Mithraists were open to men only. And this is where the mystery schools become a true fraternity, because it was, by and large, a military cult. Worship England through the rest of the Roman Empire, Italy, and into Greece. We find subterranean Mithraic cult sites, fairly well preserved because they are underground, and as they became illegal under Christian emperors, they were kind of walled up and preserved. The Eleusinian mysteries, along with all the other mystery cults, they were banned by Theodosius, I believe, in the 4th century. And so from that time on, this knowledge goes underground, or it survives only in those places where the empire does not hold sway. Now, just outside of the empire is Persia. Just outside of the empire is Middle East, the Middle East as we know it today. So this becomes kind of the hinterland, places where the empire doesn't reach so far or so strongly that they can fully stamp out these mystery religions. And that plays into the revival of fraternalism and the fraternal mysteries after the Crusades, because once we send the Templars and the Hospitallers and the Teutonic Knights into the Middle East to fight these wars, they mingle with Jews, with you could say heterodox Christians, with Muslims, with Gnostic sects that have kept the knowledge of these mysteries alive, and they carry this back into Europe. And we'll get into this later, but much that we take for granted in the mysteries was a feature of the fraternity of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were a fraternity. And this is a disputed point, but I do believe that much that the Templars learned in the Middle East does become embedded within Freemasonry.
So you say they actually they amalgamated some of their beliefs, like you say, they actually. So people think of them as something that's entirely Christian, but they may have evolved as they went along. Even the Templars did.
Correct. And the Templars inhabited that part of France that also was home to the Albigensians. So there was an Albigensian heresy that was stamped out, and they had some association with the Templars. And they were essentially Gnostic. And the Templars, their main heresy, although exoterically Christian, exoterically Catholic, within the confines of their cells, they seem to worship Sophia. So Sophia is essentially the Gnostic feminine counterpart to Christ.
Oh.
And this was something that the Gnostics simply took for granted, but Orthodoxy stamped out really any element of the feminine within the Trinity.
Okay.
And it took some centuries to do this, because initially the spirit was considered feminine, but over time the spirit was labeled as masculine, and then any mention of Sophia was stamped out or covered over, usually with bad translation. But the Gnostics understood that Sophia was a part of the Logos, that was the feminine aspect of the Logos, that the Logos and the Sophia worked together to create the world.
Because I've heard it said that many ancient religions had the idea of a woman with a child as part of their like kind of the Mary figure with the child as part of their religious belief system. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, even in the icon behind your head there, you see the twin pillars and the arch and the eye.
Yeah.
The twin pillars, as you probably know, they're masculine and feminine.
Okay.
But what they give birth to in their harmony is an androgyne, a divine androgyne.
Okay.
And it's the Logos and the wisdom embodied in a singular figure, here symbolized as the eye of Horus.
Yeah.
Christ is exoterically male, but he always has a feminine counterpart with him, either his mother, which is Mary, the Blessed Virgin, or Mary Magdalene, another Mary, who is his consort. And the Bible never explicitly says that they're married, but many of the Gnostics believe that.
Believed it, yes.
And so Christ is never worshipped apart from his Mary, be it the Magdalene or be it the Blessed Virgin. So he kind of inhabits the place between the pillars.
Okay.
And that is really the central theology of the mysteries, if we were to boil it all down.
Okay. Interesting.
Number 2, the second heading is the content of the mysteries. And we've talked about this very briefly at the end of the last, when the recording stopped. But essentially, it's this dualism. And if you look at, for instance, a chessboard, what do you see? You see interlocking squares of black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at a yin-yang, you see, again, the white and the black juxtaposed against one another and also containing white and black within themselves. And so there's this dualism that is constant throughout Eastern religions and also constant throughout mystery schools.
Okay.
Usually symbolized by twin pillars. But this dualism it's manifested, you see it in Genesis when it opens up with, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Mm-hmm. And even in Greek, this would have been, let's see if I remember my Greek, this would have been Uranus for heaven and Gaia for earth. Uranus, Kai, Gaia, heaven and earth. There's that dualism there. And when the earth was considered to be flat back in the ancient world, the earth was commensurate with heaven, that heaven and earth were commensurate together, and that they existed on one massive, potentially infinite plane, but that heaven was arched up in a gigantic dome over the earth.
Okay.
And so there's the dualism from initial creation, and it says that God separated the light from the darkness. So now we have white and black, the light from the dark, separated. Mm-hmm. There's this idea that creation itself, individuation itself, anything perceptible to the human eye, ear, mind, had to first divide. Because in God, everything is one. Everything is singular. There's a singularity. If you find yourself in singularity with God, you potentially don't even know that you exist. So for things to become perceptible to human senses, there has to be a division first. And a division into extremes. So the light from the dark is separated into extremes, and what we experience in between the light and the dark is the color spectrum. And we divide that into 7 colors. Again, another divine number.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
No, I mean, interesting. So I do know that, for instance, Freemasonry, when they talk about bringing you into the light.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So is that something to do with the creation story you're talking about? How?
Yeah, it's hard to say anything definite about Masonry because many Masonic authors have written, but no Grand Lodge will ever define Masonry. Masonry is always what the individual makes it.
Oh, okay.
But I can lean on Pike, and I can say that this essential dualism is the heart and soul, the core of the system. Not just that system, but many mystery schools rely on this dualism. And it really does come from the temple, and every Masonic lodge is a temple of the cosmos. And so that's true. That's true. And Pike is very explicit about this. Every Masonic temple is a model of the cosmos. And the officers of the lodge, they sit in the positions in which the sun rises, the sun is at its highest point, its strength, and then sets. And the north is always dark. And so it is a temple built as a model of the cosmos, just as the temple of the Old Testament. And the temple of the Old Testament had in its porch 2 pillars. And the initiate, so to speak, the high priest, to enter this cosmos had to first pass between these pillars. And these pillars represent the duality necessary for creation to even exist. So when we talk about Masonic theology, if there is such a thing, we're really talking about Jewish temple theology. Mm-hmm. It harkens back all the way to the first temple. And we see this even in the story of Samson. And the name Samson means son of, basically child of the sun.
Oh, okay.
Child of the sun. When he finds his redemption, that is when he sees the light, in spite of being physically blinded, he is placed between 2 pillars in the temple of Dagon.
That's right.
And these 2 pillars, although they're probably not named Jachin and Boaz in the Philistine tongue, they nevertheless represent duality. And he, as the child of the sun, sits between these 2 pillars of light and dark. And what he does, when he pushes against them, and that temple comes down, he has destroyed duality, and with the destruction of duality comes the crashing down of the cosmos. That is, the cosmos cannot exist without this duality existing.
Oh, okay.
So you even see this you see reference to the child of the sun in the tarot. I forget which number card it is, but it's the sun card, and you see the child riding on the horse, the child of the conquering sun.
Okay.
That's again a reference to that initiate placed between the pillars. Samson does a good deed for Israel. He collapses the cosmos, so to speak, to give a new
beginning,
to bring about a revival, a renewal of creation. So with every destruction of creation comes a renewal.
Okay.
And so he saves Israel by destroying the cosmos, so to speak.
Interesting.
So that brings me to my second point under this heading, is that the figure who stands between the pillars is usually central to the mystical drama. So within Masonry, it's Hiram. Within the Eleusinian mysteries, it was Demeter, or her daughter Proserpina. And within Mithraism, it was Mithras. Within Christianity, it's Christ. And within Judaism, it's probably Moses. And I can cite references to demonstrate that point, that Moses was the figure that stood before God between the pillars, the twin pillars of the cloud and the fire. So if you know your Old Testament, you know that God appeared to the Israelites in the desert as a pillar of smoke and a pillar of fire. That's right. There again, you have light and darkness, two pillars, but Moses stands between them and speaks to God face to face. So the initiate, or the hermetic figure, the central figure of the mythos, is between the pillars, creating harmony between these vastly different polarities. And so Christ brings harmony between the harshness of the law, so to speak, and you could say the libertinism of grace. Okay. And without harmony, without that balance, you have chaos. So if you have nothing but law, there's death. If you have nothing but grace, there's chaos. So Christ stands in the middle, and he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. Mm-hmm. But he also said to the adulteress, he said, go and sin no more. If no man condemns thee, neither do I. So the hermetic figure stands between the pillars and brings balance, and usually lives a life that we have to model our own lives after. And that's the job of the hermetic figure, who's also called a psychopomp, which simply means like a guide of souls. Christ is a guide of souls. So is Hermes a guide of souls. This is why I say that Christ is a hermetic figure.
Well, sir, I appreciate your time tonight, and we are going to have you back to finish up on some other points you have here. So that's all you have time for today. So all the best to you, and I look forward to conversing with you again, sir.
Very good, very good. And it was a pleasure to meet you, and we'll meet again at another date.
Thank you, sir. That was Catholic Perennialist, brothers and sisters. That was very, very interesting, wasn't it? I'm going to very briefly digress here, and then I'm just going to let you gather anything else you want from this on your own. But first of all, the first point I gathered was the Catholic Perennialist is, as he says, he's a Catholic, but as well as a Freemason. And as you've heard it said here on Points of Light Radio many, many times before, the Catholic Church forbids its members from joining Freemasonry, but that does not stop them from joining the craft, nor should it, shall we say. Freemasonry has its origins in the ancient Eleusinian mysteries and Mithraic mysteries, I guess he said. I've spoken on the Mithraic mysteries here, I believe, on Points of Light Radio. But this gentleman took it way further. I will say that, way, way further. And I really enjoyed hearing about that. I really did. Fraternal organizations were at their inception religious organizations, shall we say. Another point I gathered was Mithraic mystery system had 7 degrees. And if you combine, I never thought of it this way before, the Blue Orc Craft Lodge, as we call it here in Canada, with the Royal Arch, there's 7 degrees there as well. That's quite interesting. Some of the other things he raised, when it comes to the number 7, he raised several interesting points with the number 7, right? But about the number 7, that was interesting there as well. Or Freemasonry, he says, in many ways is religious because you have to believe in God. They always say, well, we're not a religion. Well, and it in many ways, shall we say, it has its origins or some of its basis in religion, not necessarily one religion of any kind. And that every Masonic lodge, right, is a model of the cosmos. That's quite interesting there, right? I'm like I said, there's many, many more. I'm still going through this myself, I encourage you to review what you've seen here and take notes as I tried to do as I went along. This was very interesting, and it's only, like I said, this is part of a 2-part series of interviews that I'm going to do with this gentleman, and I can't wait. I don't know about you, but I can't wait to actually for the next interview. I honestly can't. This was wonderful, right? But unfortunately, we're going to have to wait for now. That's because that's all I really have time for today. But before I go, I want to remind you, as I always do, that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I also welcome your comments and input. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel, as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, until we meet again, with this wonderful gentleman especially, just step into the light.